We already know that the United States was not happy with the British interfering in our western territories and also in irritating the Indians and encouraging them to attack our settlements. And also the issue of impressment was a major cause for concern. We also know that our Embargo Act of 1807 had not done what we were hoping it would do as far as keeping the British from impressing our sailors. So when James Madison becomes president in 1808, this is going to still be a major cause for concern. The war hawks, those people who wanted war, possibly and partially because of the possibility of gaining new lands, were going to be really key too. So they continued all of this harassment, and eventually we do declare war on Great Britain. This is sometimes called the Second War for Independence, because we are once again fighting to again establish ourselves as being an independent and sovereign nation. We did not invade Canada initially. That was probably a mistake. Canada was controlled by Great Britain at the time. When we fail to do this, it's going to kind of set us back in our war efforts. The war did not go well for the United States. In fact, the British even burned parts of Washington, D.C. in 1814. So this is going to be, it marks just how poorly this was going. In fact, James Madison had to flee from the city disguised in his wife's cloak just to get out of town before it was actually burned. So Washington, or parts of it, were burned. It was going so poorly that the Hartford Convention is going to meet, and this is a group of Federalists who were in the New England area. Basically, at this point in time, all of New England were Federalists, and they were going to debate whether or not they should even participate in this war. And they made it very well known that they did not want to participate. So this was going to, really question the war effort and question their part in it, and whether or not New England should really even participate in the war. So this wound up marking the end of the Federalist Party, or the beginning of the end of the Federalist Party, because what happens at the end of this, we see a really big spike in nationalism. And we'll talk about that in just a second. So the Treaty of Ghent that was finally signed in 1814, both sides basically just wanted to end this war. There was really no land that changed hands or anything. But the United States is going to win the Battle of New Orleans. This is very significant for a couple of reasons. One, the war was already over. But they obviously had not gotten word that the war was already over, that the treaty had been signed. So when they fought this battle, Andrew Jackson is going to become a major hero. He becomes a big-time war hero, and we love war heroes. He goes on to become president of the United States. He becomes a big hero. And this is going to be the largest American victory during this entire war. And it once again proves that the United States was able and capable of defeating this powerful nation of Great Britain. So here is where we talk about when this Hartford Convention and this gathering of Federalists in the New England area who didn't even want to participate in this war, this makes them look very bad. So this is why that marks the beginning of the end of the Federalist Party. We go through a time period where we see federal powers expanded. Now remember, Thomas Jefferson probably would not have liked this, but those powers are going to expand with the growth of all of these powers. We see a lot of them come through Supreme Court decisions. So we already know that the National Bank was allowed. It was argued for through implied power. So again, that expands the federal government's power and allowing them to create the National Bank. And again, they're going to argue that that was one of those necessary and proper activities that they needed for the operation of our government. We already remember that judicial review was established with Marbury versus Madison. That was that court case that's going to say that it is okay for the Supreme Court to declare laws unconstitutional. Again, we see that implied powers and national supremacy are legitimate, and they're confirmed by several other cases. The first is McCulloch versus Maryland. This is in 1819, and what happens is the state of Maryland was basically trying to tax the national bank out of existence to give their own state bank a preference in their state. This goes all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court says, no, that is not okay. You cannot pass a state law that goes directly against a federal law. So this is going to, again, confirm those that national supremacy and implied powers. Gibbons versus Ogden is another one. This had to do with boats that were running up and down rivers that crossed state lines. In this court case, it says that interstate commerce was controlled by the national government. So basically, anything that crosses state lines is going to be federal government jurisdiction. So that is going to be another one of those really key court cases that's going to establish and expand the power of our federal government. The United States, we also see, is trying to make a name for itself in foreign matters. So at the very end of 1812, we enter into a period called the Era of Good Feelings. Now we call it this because there were no wars for a while. We only had one political party. That was the Democratic Republicans, because remember, the Federalists had kind of declined and gone away. And so there's not going to be all of that political party infighting that we had seen before. But this period is going to end with the election of 1824 that we'll see. So really directly after the War of 1812, so around 1814, for about 10 years, we are in a kind of a peaceful and a period where there's a lot of nationalism. We see our northern border with Canada established at the 49th parallel that is really close to our current border. We also are going to gain Florida from the Spanish in 1819 through the Adams-Onis Treaty, which is also going to set our southwestern border with Mexico, which was also controlled by Spain at the time. So we see our territory expanding and really being ingrained, and is going to set some precedents for the future. The Monroe Doctrine is going to be a kind of a cornerstone of our foreign policy. Now, James Monroe becomes president in 1816, and we were still, remember, one of these, what I like to call little kid on the block. We were still very young, and we were kind of what you would see as possibly being weak. So we really kind of had to establish who we were and what we expected. So we tried to kind of claim this part of the world as our, quote, neighborhood. So the Monroe Doctrine states that Europeans should not interfere in this hemisphere. Basically, we told Europe to stay out of the Western Hemisphere, that if anything happened here, that the United States would be the one that would intervene and handle it. So again, this will become the cornerstone of our foreign policy, and you see future presidents build on this Monroe Doctrine, still maintaining that anything in this hemisphere should be handled by the United States. So again, that's going to be really key. Just kind of telling the rest of the world. This was actually a speech given to Congress, but this is just going to tell the rest of the world kind of where we stand. The Missouri Compromise is also going to be key. And the question that has to be answered is, how will new states decide if slavery is allowed? So we had kind of put a Band-Aid fix on the whole issue of slavery. We knew that our particular solution was not a permanent fix since the Constitutional Convention, but we were attempting at this point to try to fix that and to continue on without major division in our government. The abolitionist movement, which is the movement that wanted to outlaw slavery, was beginning to grow, specifically in the North, and we already see a lot of the North that's already outlawing or banning slavery. So that's already an issue as well. And in 1820, there's an equal number of free and slave states. Why does that matter that there's an equal number? And the answer is because of representation in Congress. That means they have basically an equal number of senators in Congress to influence legislation. So that's going to be very, very important when it comes to all of these decisions made regarding slavery. So with this Missouri Compromise, which is also called the Compromise of 1820, they agree that Missouri will enter as a slave state and Maine will enter as a free state at the same time to maintain that balance between free and slave states. So you definitely want to note that Missouri is a slave state and Maine becomes a free state to keep that balance in Congress. They then draw a line under Missouri, so that southern border of Missouri, they draw a line, and they says in the future, anything above the line would be free, so any territory that became a state above that line would be a free state, and anything below the line would be a slave state, and any future questions of whether or not those states would be slave or free. So that again is going to establish, again, another important precedent and something for our country to build on in the future. Now, this is definitely not a permanent fix to this question. This is really a temporary fix because the issue will come up again because we had not yet expanded all the way to the West Coast. So this is going to be, again, a temporary question to a very long-term problem.